The flag went up on a Tuesday in March. Nobody on Pembroke Circle thought much of it at first. A lot of people fly flags, American flags, sports flags, those big ones with the fish or the duck or whatever the husband is into. But this one was different, and Darnell Hooper knew it was going to be a problem the moment he drove past his own house and saw it snapping in the wind above his porch. He had put it up himself, the week before he left, a military service flag, a Blue Star banner, the kind families have hung in their windows since the First World War to say someone from this house is serving. His wife, Camille, had wanted something to mark the time. Darnell was being deployed to a base in the Middle East, his third rotation in 11 years with the Army, and Camille was going to be alone in that house for the better part of a year with 2 kids and a list of things Darnell was not going to be around to help with. The flag was the least of it, but it meant something to her, and so he put it up. He was gone inside of 2 weeks. The letter came in April. Camille almost missed it because it arrived in one of those envelopes designed to look unimportant, the kind with the little cellophane window and no return address that telegraphs its own insignificance. But she opened it. The Pembroke Estates Homeowners Association was writing to inform her that the flag currently displayed on the exterior of her property was in violation of community guidelines, specifically Section 4, Paragraph C of the Pembroke Estates Aesthetic Standards, which permitted only 1 exterior flag per residence of a size not to exceed 3 feet by 5 feet, and only if that flag was the flag of the United States of America. The Blue Star banner, according to the HOA, did not qualify. They gave her 30 days to remove it. Camille called Darnell, which was not easy to do. There was a time difference and a communications window and the general difficulty of reaching someone who is working in a place where the internet is a privilege and the schedule is not his to control. But she got through, and she told him, and he was quiet for a long moment in the way he got quiet when he was deciding whether something was worth his energy. He told her not to take the flag down. She asked him what she should do if they sent another letter. He said she should save it. That was the thing about Darnell, that people who underestimated him tended to miss. He was not a reactive person. He had spent 11 years in an institution that taught you to assess a situation before you moved, to understand your resources, to know the terrain. He was not going to fire back at a homeowners association from a base overseas with a bad phone connection. But he was also not going to let it go. The flag was still up in his yard. His wife was alone in that house. His kids walked past that banner every morning on their way to the bus. He told Camille to write down the date she received the letter, the date the envelope was postmarked, and to take a photograph of the flag exactly as it was hanging. Then he told her he loved her, and the call dropped. The second letter came in May. This one had a dollar figure in it, $150, assessed as a fine for non-compliance, added to their account with the association. There was language about liens. There was language about the association's right to pursue further action. Camille saved that one too. She had 3 photographs by then, each one dated, each one showing the same flag, in the same spot above the same porch, the blue star bright against the pale blue spring sky. Darnell, halfway around the world, was already thinking. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday. Marcus didn't see it, of course. Marcus was somewhere in the Middle East, doing work that the government doesn't put on postcards. His wife, Danny, was the one who pulled it from the mailbox, standing in the driveway in her scrubs, still tired from a 12-hour shift at the hospital. It was from Sycamore Creek HOA, printed on heavy cream stock, the kind that's meant to communicate seriousness. The letterhead had a little oak tree logo on it, which would have been charming under different circumstances. The letter said they had issued a violation notice 6 weeks earlier regarding an unauthorized flag display. It said that notice had gone unanswered. It said a fine of $150 had been assessed. It said that if payment was not received within 30 days, additional fines would accrue at a rate of $25 per week, and that the association reserved the right to place a lien on the property. Dani read it twice. Then she went inside, fed the kids, and called the HOA number at the bottom of the page. The woman who answered was polite in the way that people are polite when they've already decided not to help you. Dani explained that her husband was deployed. She explained that he had no way to respond to notices. She asked if there was any kind of accommodation for active duty military families. The woman said she would need to speak with the property manager, a man named Gerald Fitch. Gerald Fitch was not available. Gerald Fitch would return her call within 2 to 3 business days. He called back in 5. He told Dani that the HOA's governing documents did not contain a specific exemption for military deployment. He told her the flag was still in violation. He told her that if she simply removed it, the fines would stop accumulating, and they could work out a payment arrangement for the existing balance. She asked him to send her the relevant section of the governing documents. He said he would have someone email them over. The email came 3 days later. It was 4 pages of dense HOA bylaws, and buried on page 3 was a line about flags, that only the American flag, flown in accordance with the flag code, was permitted, and that all other banners required prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. The flag Marcus had put up was his unit's guidon, a military unit flag, not approved by any Architectural Review Committee, not the American flag. A violation technically, if you wanted to be technical about it. Dani didn't take it down. She also didn't pay the fine. Not because she was being stubborn, or not only because of that, but because something about the whole situation had started to feel wrong in a way she couldn't quite name yet. Her husband was overseas. He had no knowledge of these letters. He had no ability to respond, and a private neighborhood association was running up charges against his property in his absence, threatening to attach a lien to the home he was paying a mortgage on while serving in the United States Army. She started writing things down. Dates, names, the exact language from each letter. Gerald Fitch's name, spelled correctly. She kept the letters in a folder on the kitchen counter, and the folder got thicker through October and into November. The HOA sent 3 more letters, each one a little more formal, a little more clipped. The fines climbed past $300, then $400. The last letter before Thanksgiving mentioned, for the first time, the word foreclosure. Not as a threat exactly, more as an education. A reminder of what the association's legal options were, should it come to that. Dani read that letter standing at the kitchen counter, the kids watching cartoons in the next room. She put it in the folder. Then she picked up her phone and started looking for a lawyer who knew something about military law. Marcus hadn't told his wife about the second letter. She had enough to carry. 3 kids under 10, a dog with a bad hip, a minivan that made a sound nobody could identify, and a husband whose address changed every few months, depending on what the army needed. Dana was holding the whole thing together with meal prep and a whiteboard calendar and the particular kind of stubborn grace that military spouses develop or they don't last. Marcus had seen both kinds. So when the first letter from the HOA arrived in late spring, a formal notice about the flag bracket, the mounting hardware, the alleged violation of exterior modification rules, he told her about it in the same tone he used to mention a low tire. Something to deal with, not a crisis. By the time the second letter came, with its added language about fines accumulating at a rate of $25 per day, Marcus was 2 weeks out from deployment. He filed it in the folder he kept for things that needed attention and told himself he'd handle it before he left. He didn't handle it before he left. The thing about deployment that civilians sometimes misunderstand is the totality of it. You don't take a leave of absence. You don't hand off your files to a colleague. You step off a curb in your regular life and you come down somewhere else entirely. and the regular life just keeps running without you, like a movie playing in at an empty theater. The bills come. The seasons change. The HOA sends letters. Marcus was in a place with unreliable internet and reliable heat and work that required his full attention. He had a sat phone for emergencies, a narrow window each week to call home. Those calls were for Dana's voice and the kids fighting in the background and the dog barking at something. They were not for HOA paperwork. Dana found the folder 2 months in, when she was looking for the insurance documents. She read both letters twice, checked the postmarks, did the math on the daily fines. She called the number on the letterhead and was told the matter had been escalated. She asked what escalated meant. The woman on the phone said someone would follow up in writing. The writing arrived 11 days later. It was not a letter. It was a lien notice. The HOA had placed a lien on the property. The amount listed included the original fine, the accumulated daily charges, and something described as an administrative processing fee. The total was $1,340. The notice explained that if the balance was not resolved within 30 days, the association reserved the right to pursue further legal remedies. Dana sat at the kitchen table for a long time after she read it. The kids were at school. The dog was asleep in a rectangle of afternoon sun. She read the notice again, slowly, the way you read something when you're hoping the words will rearrange themselves into something less serious. They didn't. She couldn't reach Marcus. The window had closed. She left a message with the unit's family support coordinator, a woman named Patrice who had seen everything and whose voice never changed register regardless of what she was being told. Patrice took down the details and said she'd look into some things. What Patrice looked into was a federal law that most HOA boards, in Dana's experience, had never read all the way through. A law that had opinions, very specific and enforceable opinions, about what you could and couldn't do to a deployed service member's property while they were overseas and unavailable to defend themselves. Dana didn't know any of this yet. She just knew the number on the page was $1,340, and her husband was somewhere she couldn't reach him, and the house they had bought together, the house with the flag still mounted by the door, was being threatened over a bracket. She made herself a cup of coffee. She called Patrice back. She started writing things down. Most people have never heard of the Service Members Civil Relief Act. That's by design, in a way. It's a law that sits quietly on the books until the moment someone needs it, and then it hits like a wall. Marcus had never heard of it either. Not until his sister called a veteran's legal aid office on his behalf, 3 weeks after she'd found the certified letters stacked in his kitchen. The SCRA, that's what everyone calls it, because the full name is a mouthful, has been around in various forms since the Civil War. Congress kept updating it, strengthening it, because the country kept learning the hard way that people who leave to serve don't always have someone reliable watching their back at home. The version Marcus would benefit from had been significantly expanded in 2003, and it covered situations that, reading them now, felt like they were written with his exact circumstances in mind. The core idea is simple enough. When you are on active duty, certain legal and financial actions against you are either slowed down or stopped entirely. Not because you get special treatment as a matter of privilege, but because the law recognizes something obvious. You cannot defend yourself from something you don't know is happening. You cannot respond to a lawsuit filed in a county courthouse when you are in a different country. You cannot negotiate with a board of directors when your mail isn't being forwarded and your phone has a different number, and your days are structured around things that have nothing to do with homeowner assessments. The HOA had sent notices. They would argue that later, and they would be right. Notices had gone out. Letters had been mailed to the property address. The problem was that the property address was sitting empty, and Marcus was sitting somewhere else entirely, and nobody had taken the 20 minutes required to check whether the homeowner they were threatening with a lien was, in fact, a deployed service member. That check is not optional. That's the part the HOA's own attorney reportedly went pale over when it was explained to him. The SCRA requires that before a court can enter a default judgment against someone, before they can rule against a person who hasn't shown up to defend themselves, there has to be an inquiry into whether that person is on active military duty. There's a database. The Department of Defense maintains it. You can look someone up in about 4 minutes. If the person is deployed, the court is supposed to appoint an attorney to represent their interests, and proceedings are generally stayed, meaning paused, for at least 90 days. None of that had happened here. The lien had been filed. The fine schedule had escalated. The whole machinery of HOA enforcement had moved forward as if Marcus was simply an uncooperative homeowner ignoring his responsibilities, rather than a man who had no idea any of this was occurring. When the veteran's legal aid attorney pulled up the SCRA database entry and then pulled up the timeline of HOA actions, she apparently set down her pen and didn't pick it back up for a long moment. The lien wasn't just aggressive. Under the circumstances, it was legally vulnerable in ways the HOA board likely hadn't considered when they'd voted to approve it in whatever Tuesday evening meeting they held in somebody's living room. Marcus, still overseas at this point, was briefed over a staticky connection. His sister said he didn't say much at first. Then he asked one question. "What happens next?" "What happens next," the attorney explained, "is that you stop being the person on defense." The law was already in his corner. It had been there the whole time, waiting. The flag in his yard had been about honor. What came next was about something more specific than that. It was about accountability. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Nobody was home to receive it, of course. Marcus had been gone 11 months by then, stationed overseas with his unit, and the house on Delwood Court sat quiet, the way houses do when the person who fills them is somewhere else entirely. The letter landed in the mailbox, got rained on twice, and was eventually retrieved by Marcus's mother, Diane, who had a spare key and checked in when she could. She called Marcus's wife, Patricia, who was staying with her own family, 2 states away with their youngest. Patricia drove back that weekend, opened the envelope at the kitchen table, and read it 3 times because she couldn't quite believe what it said. The HOA had placed a lien on the house. The amount listed was $412. The origin of that figure was a fine issued the previous spring, before Marcus deployed, for a flag display that the board had determined violated community aesthetic guidelines. The fine had gone unpaid. Late fees had been added, then administrative fees on top of those, then a processing charge for the lien filing itself. $412, secured against the deed of a home belonging to a man currently serving in a combat zone. What the HOA board had done, procedurally, was not unusual for HOAs. They had followed their own bylaws with the mechanical confidence of people who have never been questioned. A fine went unpaid. They sent notices to the property address. No response came. They voted at a monthly meeting, noted it in the minutes, and authorized the lien. From inside their process, everything looked correct. From outside it, the picture was different. The notices had been sent to the house because that was the address on file. The house was empty. Marcus had submitted a change of contact information to the HOA management company before he left, listing Patricia's family address and his unit's family liaison contact. That submission, according to records Patricia later obtained, had been received. It had not been updated in the system. The notices went to Delwood Court. Nobody opened them. The clock kept running. There is a particular kind of institutional overreach that doesn't look like malice at close range. Nobody on that board woke up wanting to lien a soldier's house. They wanted their neighborhood to look a certain way, and they had a process for enforcing that, and they ran the process. The cruelty was in the indifference, not the intention. The machine didn't check whether the person it was grinding against was home. It just kept moving. Patricia contacted the management company the same week she found the letter. She explained the situation. She provided Marcus's deployment orders, which she had copies of, because she was the kind of person who kept copies of everything. The woman she spoke to was polite and said she would pass the information along to the board. 2 weeks passed. Patricia called again. She was told the board had reviewed the matter and determined that the lien would remain in place until the outstanding balance was paid in full. The fees were valid. The process had been followed. They were sorry for any inconvenience. She drove to the management office in person after that, sat across from a man named Gerald, who had the particular stillness of someone waiting for an unpleasant conversation to end, and laid the deployment orders on his desk. Gerald looked at them. He said he understood it was a difficult situation. He said the board's position was that the original fine had been properly issued before the deployment, and that the SCRA, which Patricia had mentioned by name, applied to debt obligations rather than community standards enforcement. Gerald was wrong about that. He was wrong in a specific, documented, federally consequential way. But he said it with enough confidence that Patricia left the office uncertain, which was probably the intended effect. She called her brother that night. Her brother knew a JAG officer. That phone call was the beginning of the end for Gerald's position on the matter, though Gerald didn't know it yet. The letter from the Department of Justice arrived on a Tuesday. It was not a long letter. It did not need to be. Marcus Webb had been sitting on his mother's couch in Shreveport for 11 days by then, the kind of sitting that happens when a man comes home from overseas and finds his house gone and his name attached to a foreclosure judgment he never knew existed. He had read the Service Members Civil Relief Act by that point. He had read it 3 times. His sister had printed it out at the FedEx on Airline Drive, and he had underlined the parts that mattered, which turned out to be most of it. What the SCRA says, in language that is about as plain as federal law ever gets, is that a creditor cannot foreclose on a service member's property without going to court. Not just filing paperwork. Actually, going before a judge. And before that judge can rule, someone has to verify that the person being foreclosed on is not currently serving on active duty. If they are, the court is supposed to stop. The whole thing is supposed to stop. Sycamore Ridge HOA had not stopped. They had filed. They had published the notice in a local paper, the kind of notice that assumes you are home to read local papers. They had obtained a default judgment when Marcus did not respond, which he did not respond to because he was in Djibouti and had no knowledge it existed, and then they had sold the property at a trustee's sale for $11,000 in back dues, late fees, and what the HOA's attorney had described in the filing as administrative costs. The problem, the significant and federally actionable problem, was that nobody had checked. There is a database. The Department of Defense maintains it. It is called the Defense Manpower Data Center, and it exists for exactly this purpose. Any creditor, any HOA, any law firm handling a foreclosure can go online and verify whether the person they are about to dispossess is currently wearing a uniform. The search takes about 45 seconds. Sycamore Ridge, or more specifically the law firm they had retained, had not run it. The Justice Department's Civil Rights Division has a section that handles SCRA enforcement. They do not take every case. They cannot. But they look for cases that are clean, meaning cases where the violation is not ambiguous, where the documentation is clear, and where the entity being investigated has resources sufficient to make a settlement meaningful. Marcus's case was clean. Marcus's case was, according to the investigator who called him the following Thursday, one of the cleaner ones she had seen in some time. What federal enforcement looks like in practice is not dramatic. There are no raids. Nobody gets arrested for foreclosing on a soldier's house, which is its own conversation. What happens is that the Justice Department sends a letter. The letter explains what was found. The letter explains what the law requires. And the letter explains, in careful language, that nonetheless carries the full weight of the federal government. What happens if the matter is not resolved? The HOA's board received that letter on the same Tuesday Marcus received his. Their attorney, who had handled the foreclosure, received a separate letter. The property management company that had advised the board on the foreclosure proceedings received a third. Marcus did not know any of this when it was happening. He found out later, in pieces, the way you usually find out about things that were decided in rooms you were not in. What he knew on Tuesday was that someone in Washington had read the file and agreed that what happened to him was not legal, that the law he had underlined on his mother's couch was a real thing that real people enforced. That deployed did not mean defenseless, even when it had felt exactly like that for the better part of 3 months. He folded the letter. He put it in the folder with everything else. He had a feeling he was going to need it. The HOA's attorney sent the first letter on a Tuesday. By Friday, there were 3 more, each one slightly sharper in tone, slightly more specific in its threats. Randall Whitfield read them at his kitchen table the same way he read everything those days. Slowly, carefully, with a yellow legal pad beside him and a pen that he kept clicking without realizing it. He had been home for 11 days. The letters made a simple argument. Whatever protections had applied during Marcus's deployment were, in the HOA's view, now expired. Marcus was stateside. The account was in arrears. The board had been more than patient, the letters said, though patience was not a word Marcus would have used to describe what they had done to his property while he was gone. Randall spread the letters across the table in chronological order and read them again. Then he called his son. Marcus listened without interrupting, which was something he had gotten better at in the years since he enlisted. When his father finished, he asked 2 questions. The first was about the timeline. The second was about the lien. The lien was still on the property. That was the problem. The SCRA had halted the foreclosure proceedings, and the Department of Justice inquiry had put the board on notice. But the lien itself, filed before any of that, filed while Marcus was overseas and unreachable, had never been formally withdrawn. It sat on the title like a splinter no one had bothered to pull out. They needed it gone. Randall had spent the previous 3 weeks building the kind of paper record that most people never think to build until they need one desperately and no longer can. He had the original HOA notices, each one postmarked and catalogued. He had the board meeting minutes from 2 consecutive sessions in which Marcus's property was discussed. His name on the agenda while he was stationed 7,000 miles away, with no notice sent to any designated representative. He had the letters from the HOA's own attorney acknowledging that the account holder was on active duty. He had all of it. What he didn't have yet was someone to put it in front of. That changed on a Wednesday morning when a woman named Patricia Osei returned his call. She worked with a veterans legal aid organization that had been quietly documenting SCRA violations for years, building cases not just for individual service members, but for the pattern behind them. She asked Randall to email everything he had. He did it before they finished the call. 2 days later, she called back and said they had enough. What followed was not dramatic in the way people expect legal victories to be dramatic. There was no courtroom, no gavel, no moment of sudden reversal. There was instead a series of letters, each one more formal than the last, moving between attorneys and board members, and, eventually, the HOA's liability insurer. There was a meeting that Randall attended and Marcus joined by phone, sitting in a break room at his base with the door closed. There was a document placed on a table and a pen that someone else picked up. The lien was released on a Thursday afternoon. Patricia emailed Randall a copy of the recorded withdrawal within the hour. He printed it. He held it for a moment, then he put it in the folder with everything else. Marcus called that evening and Randall read him the language from the document, the dry legal phrasing that meant, in plain terms, that the thing they had put on his home while he was away was now gone. Marcus said good. He didn't say much else. Neither did Randall, because there wasn't much else that needed saying. Some things get resolved without a speech. The work was in the record, and the record was complete, and what had been taken without his son's knowledge had been given back. Randall closed the folder and set it on the shelf above his desk. The settlement came through on a Tuesday, which felt right somehow. Not a Monday with all its drama, not a Friday begging for celebration. Just a plain Tuesday, the kind of day that gets things done. Marcus got the call while he was at the commissary. His attorney kept it brief because the details spoke for themselves. The HOA had agreed to every term. The lien was dissolved. The fines were wiped. The legal fees, every dollar Marcus had spent defending a home he hadn't even been living in, were reimbursed in full. And the board had agreed to mandatory SCRA training for any management company they hired going forward. That last part wasn't required. Marcus had asked for it anyway, and they said yes, because by that point they didn't have much room to say no. He didn't whoop or holler. He bought a cup of coffee and sat with it for a while. The thing people don't understand about cases like this is that winning doesn't feel the way you imagine it will when you're in the middle of fighting. When the letters were coming, when the lien hit his credit, when he was trying to explain his situation to an HOA board that treated every phone call like an inconvenience. Back then, winning felt like it would feel enormous, like a wave breaking. But when it actually arrives, it feels quieter than that. It feels like setting something heavy down. What the Service Members' Civil Relief Act did, in plain terms, was refuse to let the HOA pretend Marcus didn't exist. That's the core of it. The law was written because Congress recognized something important. You cannot ask someone to leave, to go serve somewhere they didn't choose, to put their regular life on hold, and then allow institutions to dismantle that life in their absence. The SCRA isn't a loophole. It isn't a technicality. It is the law saying clearly that absence under orders is not the same as abandonment. The HOA's mistake, and it was a significant one, was treating those concepts as interchangeable. Marcus wasn't there, so Marcus must not care. Marcus wasn't responding, so Marcus must be ignoring them. Neither was true. Marcus was doing his job, the one that took him away from the home they were threatening to lien. What the case also revealed was something more uncomfortable for the board, which is that the process they followed was not unusual. They had done this before, not to service members necessarily, but the pattern of fast escalation, of moving to liens before exhausting communication, of treating fines as revenue rather than correction. That was baked into how they operated. The SCRA claim forced a review. The review found problems. The problems required remedies beyond just Marcus's situation. He never moved back to that house, as it turned out. His next posting took him elsewhere, and he eventually sold the property at a number he was satisfied with a clean title and no clouds hanging over it. He said later that the clean title mattered to him more than the money. That after everything, he just wanted it to be his again, clearly and without asterisk. If there's a lesson here, and there is, though it's not a complicated one, it's that the law exists to be used, not as a weapon, not as a last resort born of desperation, but as the first and reasonable response to institutional overreach. Marcus had rights before he ever hired an attorney. He had them the day he shipped out. He just needed someone to name them out loud. The training the HOA agreed to takes about 3 hours. It covers the basics of the SCRA, what it requires, what it prohibits, and who it protects. 3 hours to prevent exactly what happened to Marcus from happening to someone else. It is, all things considered, a very small amount of time. He said he hoped they paid attention.